She left me at the peak of my empire, surrounded by luxury, money, and stability, to chase flashes, parties, and a man who seemed to control the city's elite. That night, while she toasted with champagne and a multi-million-dollar penthouse, I already knew that that shine would not last. What she never imagined is that the man she abandoned in silence was the very one who, without showing his face, pulled the invisible strings of power, contracts, events, and fortunes throughout the entire city. She thought she was leveling up, when in fact she was walking straight toward her own downfall. This is not just a story of betrayal. It is a story about ambition, illusion, real power, and late regret. Today you will understand how someone can trade an empire for a mirage, and how karma charges every cent for the wrong choice. And I guarantee you, the ending is colder, harsher, and more impactful than you imagine. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because stories like this show that in the game of money and power, it is not always the one who shines the most, who truly commands. I was only 25 years old when I saw my name featured on the biggest business magazines in the country. Young CEO, companies valued in the millions, international contracts, investments in rapid expansion. My routine was made of dinners with investors, private jet flights, meetings in buildings that touch the sky. I controlled figures most people would never see even in a lifetime combined. And even with all of that, I still rushed home, because I believed my greatest fortune was waiting for me inside. The mansion's garage looked more like a supercar exhibition. Ferrari, Lamborghini, armored SUVs, all paid for in cash. The house was located in one of the most exclusive gated communities in the city, 24-hour security, billionaire neighbors, and absolute silence. Inside, every detail breathed luxury, power, and money. Imported marble, works of art worth fortunes, cutting-edge technology on every wall. But none of them mattered to me as much as the woman I believed to be my balance. I gave her everything money could buy. Unlimited cards, jewelry that cost more than many apartments, designer clothes brought directly from Europe, first-class international trips, five-star hotels, parties of the highest elite. I made sure to show that she was not just my wife, but the queen of the empire I had built with blood, sleepless nights, and risky decisions. In my mind, I was living the perfect marriage. I worked like a maniac during the day and made up for it with attention, comfort, and absolute security for her. I believed love was also about providing stability, luxury, and protection. Every goal reached at the company was celebrated with a new surprise for her. Every contract closed became a new trip. Every growth in net worth turned into more pampering, more gifts, more privileges. People saw me as a cold, calculating, almost unreachable businessman. But at home, I was different. I was the husband who set flowers in the middle of the wheat, who left notes on her pillow, who worried about whether she had gotten home safely from the gym. While the world saw me as a millionaire CEO, she knew the man who believed he was building a life for two. On social media, our life looked like a modern fairy tale. Photos on yachts, exclusive restaurants, gala events, trips to destinations that only appear in movies, comments full of envy, admiration, and fantasies about our routine. And I confess, I was proud of it. Proud to be able to offer that life and to see people admire what we had built together. At least that is what I believed. I never spared any effort to make her feel above any financial insecurity. I never wanted her to lack anything, never wanted her to feel limits. My reasoning was simple. If I had power, money, and influence, she had them too. I opened doors, rolled out red carpets, bought access. To me, all of that was just love translated into possibilities, and in the middle of all that luxury. I never realized that abundance can create a dangerous kind of illusion. The illusion that everything is replaceable, that people are stages, that feelings follow the logic of the market. I was too busy expanding companies, closing deals, and multiplying money to notice the small changes that were beginning to appear in the light of her eyes. I thought I had conquered everything: empire, power, status, and love. I truly believe that the only things that could threaten the world were an economic crisis, an aggressive competitor, or a strategic mistake. I never imagined that the first blow to my empire would come from where I least expected, from the one I trusted the most, precisely when I believed I was at my peak, even surrounded by everything most people would take a lifetime to achieve. She began to change before my eyes without me realizing it at first. In the beginning, the signs were almost invisible. A comment here, a sigh there, an expression of boredom in the middle of an event that once delighted her. I attributed it to fatigue, routine, the weight of living under the spotlight, never to dissatisfaction. Social media became an extension of her desire. Increasingly produced photos, enigmatic captions, silent comparisons with millionaire influencers. Women who seemed to live in even more exaggerated ostentation than ours. I watched it thinking it was just common vanity. I did not realize that, behind the screens, a hunger was being born that no amount of money in my account could satisfy. The parties began to change as well. Before, an elegant dinner or a closed high society event was enough. Later, she began to desire bigger, louder, more exhibitionist environments. Rooftop parties with famous DJs, imported champagne open like water, guests competing for attention as if it were a valuable currency. And I, wanting to please her, kept financing everything without questioning. She was no longer impressed by the trips I planned. Paris, Dubai, Monaco, New York. Destinations that once were dreams started to be treated as ordinary routine. The look of novelty gave way to a gaze that always seemed to be searching for something beyond. I saw it, but I did not understand it. I thought it was just another side effect of the luxury life I myself had provided. Inside the house, the glow began to change its tone. The smile no longer always reached her eyes. Conversations became more superficial. She spoke much more about people I did not know. Names from the social elite that did not pass through my business radar. They were famous profiles, backstage stories, pillars of a world that I, too busy building wealth, did not frequent. I still believed that love was sustained by comfort, stability, and financial presence. While I fought to keep our empire growing, she seemed more concerned with who was in front of the cameras, who set the trends, who was seen. I watched her become more and more connected to what shined on the outside, and less connected to what sustained everything on the inside. The demands became more subtle, yet more frequent. A piece of jewelry that everyone was wearing, a car that the investors' wives already had, an invitation to a party where everyone important would be, and I, blind to the idea of being enough, always complied. Each yes from me seemed to silence for a moment something that was growing inside her, but it never truly solved anything. I began to notice that she no longer admired success. She idolized the showcase of success, the stage, the flashes, the applause. It was no longer enough to be rich. It was necessary to seem even richer than the rich. It was no longer enough to have power. It was necessary to display power. And without realizing it, she started to measure people not by character, but by the appearance of greatness. Even so, I kept believing that all of it was just a phase of vanity, of comparison, of enchantment. I never imagined that this constant need for status was preparing the ground for something much bigger, something that would not involve only parties, clothes, or money, but a choice that would forever change the course of our story. Because the more she sought to move closer to this new world of exaggerated glamour, the farther she moved away from me, and I, immersed in the reports, contracts, and numbers of my empire, did not realize that her next decision would be born precisely in one of those environments that I myself was financing. The party took place in a penthouse that seemed to float above the city. Floor-to-ceiling glass, an infinity edge pool, golden lights reflecting on the skyline. A helicopter landing on the rooftop as if it were a common detail of the night. Imported champagne flowed like water. Jewels shone brighter than the chandeliers. and the guests talked about money as if it were a trivial subject. I arrived with her by my side, confident, certain that it was just another elite event that I helped sustain. Right at the entrance, everyone was greeted by the man they called the host of the party, influential, famous, surrounded by important people, a trained smile, a gaze that seemed to measure each person's value in seconds. He wore designer brands from head to toe, exuded success, walked like someone who believed himself untouchable. When he saw her, his eyes lingered longer than usual, and when she noticed, she returned the look with a smile I had not seen in quite some time. I trusted what we had built, who I was, what I provided. I made the introductions naturally, shook hands, exchanged compliments, talked about business, investments, numbers that made many eyes widen. Meanwhile, she slowly drifted away, drawn by the flashes, the shallow conversations, the easy praise. I thought it was just the common glow of a luxury party. The music grew louder. The glasses multiplied. The laughter echoed through the halls as if it were the center of the universe. And it was in one of those moments, when I stepped away to take a call from an international investor, that something in the atmosphere shifted without me realizing it. Minutes later, when I returned, I saw the two of them talking far too closely. She laughed with a lightness that no longer existed with me. It was not a loud laugh. It was discreet, almost complicit. He whispered something in her ear, and she tilted her head to hear better. A simple gesture, almost imperceptible in the crowd. But in that instant, something inside me tightened in a strange way. I ignored it. I told myself it was just paranoia, that I was tired, that environment created illusions. The night went on with toasts, photos, empty promises, and endless ostentation. The host of the party made sure to remain close to her at all times, sometimes offering drinks, sometimes introducing famous people, sometimes simply ensuring she was always at the center of attention. And she accepted everything with pleasure, as if she were finally breathing the air she had always desired. I watched her from a distance, mixed among businessmen, politicians, and investors, while she seemed increasingly distant, even though she was only a few meters away from me. It was strange to realize that, amid so much luxury that I myself had helped finance, I was beginning to feel like a secondary guest in my own wife's life. And still, I did not grasp the true magnitude of what was forming there. When the party reached its peak, with fireworks lighting up the city outside and loud music inside the penthouse, I realized that she was no longer within my reach with just a glance. She was enchanted by the world of flashes, applause, and instant fame. Enchanted by a man who represented exactly the kind of status that her social media so constantly exalted. I never imagined that night, which for me was just another elite event, would be for her the gateway into a double life. A life that would begin right there, under warm lights, raised glasses, and silent promises. A life I would only discover later, when the consequences were already in motion. Because while I believed everything was under control, something invisible had already been set in motion in that luxury penthouse. And I still did not know that conversation, those laughs, and those looks would be only the first step on a path she was about to choose. Away from me. After that night, everything continued to look normal on the outside, but inside, something was already completely out of place. She began to go out more, always with well-rehearsed justifications. Last-minute meetings, unexpected events, irresistible invitations from the new elite she said she needed to frequent. I believed her, because I had always believed her. While I closed multi-million-dollar contracts during the day, she began to close invisible doors between us at night. Messages started to disappear from her phone. Notifications muted. The screen always face down. Passwords I once knew changed without explanation. I saw it, but I did not connect the dots. My focus was on numbers, mergers, acquisitions, growing wealth. I believed trust was part of marriage, not surveillance. Little did I know that, at that very moment, she was already living to parallel worlds. During the day, she was still the wife of the millionaire CEO, lunches at expensive restaurants, shopping in luxury boutiques, photos in sophisticated settings. At night, she transformed into the discreet lover of the man who represented fame, shallow ostentation, and instant shine. She changed routes, changed her tone of voice, even changed her perfume. As if each identity required a different kind of mask. The trips began to multiply, always with convincing excuses, friends, events, influencer invitations. I approved them, transferred money, organized everything so she could go with the maximum possible comfort. Jets, five-star hotels, exclusive reservations. While I believed I was being a generous husband, I was unknowingly financing the very meetings that were tearing our marriage apart. Inside the house, the atmosphere cooled little by little. Touches became brief, glances fleeting, silences long. Before, she waited for me for dinner. Now, many times, I found only an empty table. She said she had eaten out, that she had been delayed, that the day had been exhausting, and I, worn out by the battles of the corporate world, accepted the little that remained. The way she spoke about me also began to change. Before, I was my husband, my love, my partner. Little by little, I became just him. A detail, a distant name. I felt it in the tones, in the pauses, in the quick disconnections, as if my presence were an obligation she needed to fulfill, no longer a place where she wanted to be. I noticed that she often came home with a sparkle in her eyes that she no longer had with me, a sparkle I attributed to alcohol, loud music, the adrenaline of parties. I did not imagine that it came from encounters with another reality, another promise, another man. I still made a point of embracing her, even when she barely returned it. Meanwhile, my company was growing like never before. New contracts, new buildings, new paths being bought in the city. Money was coming in increasingly absurd volumes. I was growing in silence, focused, strategic. And she, at the same time, was growing in distance, vanity, and hidden contempt. To opposite growths within the same marriage. The double life was consolidating itself without me fully realizing it. She perfected lies, refined alibis, chose her words more carefully. I perfected businesses, refined strategies, multiplied wealth. Each of us followed a different game. Inside the same house, under the same luxury roof, sustained by a truth that only one of us knew. And while I believed that the greatest risk of my life was a poorly made deal or a wrong investment, the real danger was already sleeping beside me. A danger I did not yet dare to name, but that would soon stop being mere suspicion and become certainty. Her change stopped being subtle and became impossible to ignore. Her tone of voice turned cold, her replies to short, her glances sharp and sideways. I would talk about multi-million-dollar contracts closed a day, about companies acquired, about new investments, and she would react only with silence or disinterest. The woman who once celebrated every achievement of mine now treated my success as something ordinary, almost irrelevant. For the first time, I began to feel that the money I brought into that house no longer meant respect. She began to correct me in public, cutting remarks at dinners, ironic looks at events, small humiliations disguised as jokes. In front of businessmen, investors, and important guests, she made a point of diminishing me. I, who had always placed her above everyone else, began to be treated like someone outdated, like an old piece of an empire that was still growing. And even so, I avoided confrontation, trying to understand where I had failed. The comparison started to appear more frequently. So-and-so is more influential. What's his name is more visible. That person dominates the city's parties. Everything was measured by fame, visibility, and applause. It no longer mattered who paid the bills, who sustained the luxury, who financed every jewel, every trip, every event. What mattered was only who appeared more, who was talked about more, who created the greatest impact on social media, inside the house. The contempt came in small daily doses. A dinner ignored, an affection rejected, a conversation cut short. She would come in and go straight to the bedroom, lock the door, speak on the phone in a low voice. I felt like a stranger inside the very mansion I had paid for in cash. Every step I took seemed to bother her, as if my presence were a weight she had to endure. Her gaze changed into something I had never seen before. It was a look of impatience, of judgment, as if I were now insufficient even though I owned companies, properties, stocks, buildings, contracts, and figures that moved millions every month. For the first time in my life, I felt that wealth was no longer synonymous with value in the eyes of the person I loved. She began to miss important commitments by my side. Dinners with investors, corporate events, gala meetings. There was always a ready excuse. Fatigue, a headache, another invitation considered more strategic. I attended alone, answering questions with rehearsed smiles, protecting the image of a marriage that, on the inside, was beginning to crumble in silence. And the most cruel part was realizing that the more I tried to get closer, the more distant she became. I tried to talk, to understand, to recover something I felt slipping through my fingers. She responded with indifference, as if I were interrupting something far more important, as if the man who had taken her out of an ordinary life were now just an old step. She had already climbed. The humiliations also began to come in a more direct tone. Comments about my age, my reserved manner, my excessive focus on work. She said I lived in a world of numbers and that it was no longer enough for her. I listened to everything in silence, trying not to show the pain that made my chest tighten night after night. I still supported every detail of her life. Cards, bills, cars, trips, clothes, luxury. Everything came from my financial empire. Even so, I felt like I was merely the sponsor of the life of someone who no longer included me in her own plans. I believed it was just a difficult phase, that love would return to balance. I was deeply mistaken, because while I believed I was fighting to save the marriage, she had already decided that I was no longer a man powerful enough to occupy the place I myself had built for her, and that contempt I now felt on my skin was only the beginning of something much larger, something I still could not fully see. The discovery did not come like in the movies, with scandalous confrontations or tearful confessions. It came cold, technical, calculated, like almost everything else in my life as a businessman. A security report showed strange movement involving one of the cars I had put in her name. Times that did not match, routes that made no sense, places I never went. In that moment, something inside me went on alert. It was not anger. It was not pain. It was instinct. The same instinct that made me rich too early. I decided to observe in silence. I decided not to ask anything. I decided to let the truth come to me on its own. Within a few days, the pieces began to fit together by themselves. Deleted messages left traces on servers I controlled without her knowing. External camera records showed frequent meetings at the same times. Financial movements revealed expenses that did not match the destination she claimed to visit. Each piece of data landed like a silent punch to the stomach. I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply took a deep breath and kept collecting everything. My heart began to bleed in silence at that moment. His name appeared among the records, almost casually. The same man from the party. The same one who claimed to own everything that shining night. The same one who now appeared as a recurring destination in her double life. I saw too much to misunderstand what was happening. I saw hugs. I saw laughter. I saw intimacy. I saw promises being made in simple gestures. Each image dismantled a version of the marriage I was still trying to protect inside myself. The truth was there, raw, objective, impossible to deny. I closed the files and remained sitting in the dark for a long time. For the first time, the empire did not protect me from feeling pain. The strangest part was realizing that something inside me changed in that same instant. The pain came, but alongside it was born an even deeper silence. A strategic silence. The silence of someone who understands that shouting does not change facts. The silence of someone who has already made irreversible decisions before even speaking them. I looked at that same luxury house with different eyes. The mansion stopped being a home and became a setting. The marble walls stopped being shelter and became witnesses. And I, without anyone noticing, became another man inside the same body. That night, she came home smiling as always. She talked about an event, a meeting, a friend. I listened to everything with calculated attention. I asked simple questions and received rehearsed answers. Every word she spoke was dismantled in my mind by everything I already knew. I agreed, smiled, kissed her forehead as always. Inside, every gesture became another note in the invisible dossier I was beginning to assemble. She thought she was ahead in the game. I already had the entire board in my hands. In the days that followed, I kept my business routine as normal. Meetings, contracts, acquisitions, high-value investments. I signed papers that changed entire economies while, inside, I reorganized my own life. The money kept coming in absurd volumes. Power continued to grow, but now all of it had a new meaning. For the first time, my decisions were no longer just corporate. They were beginning to touch the very structure of my personal life. And I still had no idea who else would be affected by that. The most painful part was pretending normality in front of her. Mechanical kisses, empty conversations, promises that no longer made sense. Every time she left saying "see you later," I knew exactly where she was going. And that silent certainty weighed more than any scream. I learned in that period that betrayal does not hurt only because of the act. It corrodes because of the theater, the daily performance, the coldness of pretending that nothing is happening. And I began to feel the corrosion working slowly inside me. Even so, I did not confront her. Not because I was weak, but because I was preparing myself. Companies are not defeated by impulse. Empires do not fall by shouting. Everything must be done at the right time. I continued to observe, to collect, to calculate. Every step she took was recorded. Every step I took was planned. I was no longer just a husband betrayed in silence. I was a CEO in a state of total alert. And that would change everything. It was during the period that I understood that pain, when well controlled, becomes strategy. That a wounded heart can be the greatest advisor when the mind is cold. I still slept beside her every night. I still sustained that life of luxury as if nothing had changed. But inside, something irreversible was already in motion. Something that only needed time to leave the paper. And while she believed she was living the most vibrant phase of her life, I already knew that the story was moving toward an inevitable breaking point. A rupture that would not happen with a scream. It would happen in silence, at the right time, in a way only those who understand power, money, and control know how to conduct. And when that moment arrived, nothing she knew as security would remain intact. The request for separation came in a surprisingly cold way, almost as if it were being read from a ready-made script. She chose an ordinary morning, with no tears, no trembling in her voice, no sign of guilt. She said she needed to live new experiences, that she no longer felt represented by my side. She spoke of freedom, of following new paths, of seeking what truly made her happy. I listened to everything in silence, looking at the woman I barely recognized. None of her words mentioned love, respect, or gratitude. Only desires, only wishes, only ambitions. And yet, she seemed convinced that she was making the right choice. In that moment, I understood that for her, that scene was a liberation. For me, it was only the confirmation of what I already knew. She left the mansion like someone stepping off a stage to applause. Designer clothes, new suitcases, head held high, phone in hand filming her own departure. She made a point of recording every detail, every step, every silent goodbye. I remained still at the door, watching everything with the same coldness with which I watch market charts. No pleading, no attempt at dialogue, no further explanation. She wanted to show the world that she was winning, and the world, through social media, seemed to agree with her at that moment. Photos appeared hours later, already beside the new man. Captions talking about freedom, self-love, new beginnings. And I, once again, appeared only as the past left behind. The host of the party began to appear in every post like a trophy. Different luxury cars every day, exclusive restaurants, tables surrounded by famous people. She seemed to have finally reached the kind of visibility she had always desired. Likes piled up, comments exploded, praise rained down like virtual applause. To those watching from the outside, she had traded a husband for something even better. To those who truly understood the game of money, it was still just a facade. But she did not see it that way. To her, it was the consecration of her own ambition. Meanwhile, I carried on exactly as before. Same routine, same hours, same commitments. The only difference was that there was no longer any theater inside my own house. The nights became silent, enormous inside an empty mansion. I dined alone, walked through the corridors alone, slept in a bed that once held the stories. And even so, I felt no regret. I felt only the strange calm of someone who had already understood the end of the chapter. She believed she had conquered something greater than me. She believed she had risen to a higher level in the hierarchy of power. She believed she had traded stability for a more glamorous version of her life. I allowed her to believe that. I never contradicted her. I never exposed anything. I never tried to stop her. Because, at that moment, silence was still my most powerful tool. Our mutual friends began to take sides. Some drifted away from me. Others drew even closer. Many simply observed, curious, waiting to see who would truly emerge as the winner of that story. I did not compete for attention. I did not compete over versions of the story. I did not compete over narratives. I simply continued expanding my businesses, acquiring new assets, further consolidating my financial empire. She, on the other hand, dove ever deeper into the new life. Events, parties, whirlwind trips, improvised interviews. She began to be recognized by a last name that was no longer mine. And that seemed to be, for her, a badge of honor. Every step she took was driven by the conviction that she had made the best investment of her life. An investment that, in her mind, now yielded status, fame, and visible power. What she did not know was that many of the structures behind that ostentation were, directly or indirectly, connected to companies that carried my signature. Sponsorships, suppliers, contracts, properties, high-end services. I saw everything moving beneath the surface, like silent gears. She saw only the display window. I knew the entire mechanism, while she publicly celebrated the separation as a rebirth. I simply observed. No interference, no haste, no impulsive reaction. In wars of power, time is always more lethal than brute force, and I was willing to let it act. She felt invincible. The new man seemed untouchable. The parties continued. The applause continued. The money seemed inexhaustible. Everything apparently perfect. But I already knew that that castle had been built on a foundation. I understood better than anyone else. And fragile foundations always demand their price. Because while she believed she was living her greatest victory, the real chessboard was beginning to move without her even realizing it. And every step she took against me without knowing it only brought her closer to the moment when she would discover who, in fact, had always been behind everything. The revelation began discreetly, almost imperceptibly to those who only saw the surface of things. A contract broken here, a sponsorship canceled there, an event that no longer happened without any official explanation. To her and to the new man, it seemed like mere bad luck in the market. To me, it was simply the machinery beginning to turn. Companies do not collapse overnight by chance. Backstage always comes before visible falls, and I knew every detail of the backstage. That city had always been driven by money, influence, and invisible connections. Connections that, for the most part, passed through me. I merely let the natural flow of things follow its course. Without noise, without exposure, without haste. She began to find it strange when some invitations stopped arriving. Fewer parties. Places that had once been exclusive began to deny reservations. People who once flattered her started to respond with coldness. I learned of this through third parties, never directly from her. The shine on social media began to waver. The photos were still luxurious, but the surroundings were changing. Fewer relevant partners, fewer strong brands, fewer spontaneous applause. Everything still looked normal to those watching from the outside. But those who knew the market felt the atmosphere slowly shifting. And I felt that when turning in favor of Tom, the man she called powerful began to face unexpected obstacles. Meetings postponed, investors cautious, credit lines frozen, suppliers demanding guarantees they had never asked for before. He became more tense, more impulsive, more aggressive. The ostentation continued as an attempt to appear unshaken. But behind the cameras, the coffers no longer had the same strength. The glass castle was beginning to show its first cracks, and she still believed she was at the top, not realizing that the ground was already trembling beneath her feet, little by little. The names of my companies began to surface in backstage conversations, first as rumors, then as silent certainties. Banks I controlled directly or indirectly pulled back. Investment groups in which I had strategic participation interrupted negotiations. Sponsors that depended on my assets disappeared without public explanation. Everything within the law, everything within the rules of the game. Nothing done as explicit revenge. Just business being reorganized according to strategic interests. As it has always been, as it has always worked in the city. That was when she heard, for the first time, someone mention my name in a different tone. Not as the discreet ex-husband, not as the reserved businessman, but as the one who truly moved the gears of the local elite, owner of buildings, owner of public contracts, owner of major events, owner of an entire chain of businesses that sustained the luxurious world. For the first time, the past she had discarded began to seem greater than she had imagined. And that realization did not come from me. It came from the very environment that had welcomed her. The new man began to show uneasiness. Questions arose. Discreet inquiries were made. Silent investigations about me began to take place. My name appeared in structures he had never associated with my figure. The truth began to sink in for him before it did for her, and that clearly unsettled him. I sensed it through the reports that reached me. He was beginning to understand where he had gotten himself into, but it was already too late to retreat. The machinery of power does not reverse once it is in motion. She, on the other hand, took longer to accept reality. To her, everything still seemed like just a bad period, a difficult phase, a temporary adjustment. Pride would not let her see the size of the web surrounding her. She believed that fame, beauty, and visibility would solve any financial problem. After all, there was always someone willing to pay for the kind of shine. At least, that was what she thought. But the city was beginning to close its doors with a speed she was not used to, and every closed door echoed through her world of illusions. When the truth finally began to become impossible to deny, it came through third parties. A conversation cut short, a comment spoken in a low voice, an invitation denied without justification. Someone finally said that I was not just rich, that I owned the greatest gears that moved the local elite. That much of that luxury existed because my company sponsored it, directly or indirectly. That sentence echoed louder than any scream. Because, at that moment, everything began to reorganize itself inside her mind. The world she believed she had conquered solely through the new relationship began to reveal itself as an invisible extension of my own empire. Each party, each event, each contract of the new man now seemed connected to threads I had controlled. Long before she was born into the glamour, she began to connect facts that had once seemed disconnected. Cancellations, sudden drops, strategic silences. The city that once applauded her began to watch her from a distance, and that made her uneasy in a way she had never felt before. As for me, I remained in absolute silence. I made no effort to expose anything. I did not call. I sent no messages. I made no visible displays of power. Because those who truly dominate a territory do not need to announce their dominance. True power manifests itself in effects, not in announcements. And the effects were already clear to those who knew how to see. The revelation did not come as an immediate shock. It came as a slow chill running down the spine, a chill that would soon turn into fear. And the closer she came to the truth, the more desperately she began to realize that she had traded stability for an illusion sustained by foundations that did not belong to her. The shine began to fade. Security gave way to doubt. Arrogance began to crack. And I knew that this revelation was not yet the worst of it. It was only the antechamber of what was to come next. The downfall began quietly in the newspapers, in small footnotes that almost no one read. A lawsuit here, an investigation there, a rumor of fraud in sponsorship contracts. For the general public, nothing yet seemed serious. For those who understood the market, it was already a clear sign of imminent collapse. Banks began to call in old debts. Partners demanded guarantees he could not provide. Investors pulled away without announcing a reason. The money, which once seemed infinite, began to slip away like sand through the fingers. And when money disappears, power goes with it. The image of a tycoon began to crack in silence. But the worst was still to come. Luxury events were the first to disappear. Parties canceled at the last minute. International DJs canceling their appearances. Venues that once bowed to him now demanded payment in advance. Ostentation, once natural, became forced. Each new post on social media seemed like a desperate attempt to show strength. But those who knew the backstage already saw the despair behind the flashes. The king of parties was no longer invited to the main tables of the elite. He was beginning to be treated as a risk. And risk is something money runs from without looking back. The companies linked to his name began to collapse one by one. Sponsors terminated contracts. Suppliers broke agreements. Employees resigned when they realized salaries would be delayed. Labor lawsuits appeared in swarms. His name began to circulate in closed investor groups as an example of instability. Credibility dissolved rapidly. Without credibility, capital does not stay. Without capital, no empire survives. The public image still tried to hold on. But inside, everything was already in collapse. She still tried to maintain her composure. She kept posting photos in expensive places. She kept smiling in front of luxury cars that were no longer his. She kept pretending everything was normal while the ground sank beneath her feet. But the new man no longer had the same shine. Designer clothes began to repeat. Trips decreased drastically. Invitations became scarce. The circle of flatterers disappeared like smoke. Silence began to scream louder than any public scandal. And she tasted, for the first time, the bitter flavor of instability. The lawsuits began to gain volume and visibility. Hearings scheduled, judicial freezes, accounts blocked, vehicles seized, properties listed as collateral. The word bankruptcy began to appear in backstage conversations. The press, which once exalted him, now treated him as an example of recklessness and arrogance. His name became associated with risk, no longer with power. And she, always at his side, began to be seen as part of that same failure. The elite does not forgive weakness. It simply distances itself from it. With the fall of money came the fall of prestige. Friendships evaporated. Invitations ceased. Important names stopped answering calls. The man who once walked through any door now waited for replies that never came. The phone rang less with each passing day. The silence became deafening. She began to realize that the world she had fled to was sustained only as long as profit existed. And without profit, there was no longer a place for either of them on that stage. Arguments between them became frequent. Veiled accusations, blame thrown from one side to the other. The love that had seemed so intense during the phase of ostentation revealed itself fragile in the face of debt. Admiration turned into demands. Desire turned into fear. Luxury gave way to constant tension. and she began to see on his face the same impotence she had once seen on mine. But now without any safety net. At that point, she began to lose more than money. She lost identity. She lost status. She lost social respect. She lost allies. She lost the sense of security that had always guided her choices. Each new financial problem was a cruel reminder that none of it had ever been truly solid. The glass castle was not only cracking, it was now slowly collapsing before everyone's eyes. I followed everything from a distance, through cold reports, objective numbers, and public records. There was no explicit pleasure in it. There was only the confirmation of what always happens when someone builds a life on appearances. Real money is silent. Noisy ostentation falls quickly. I did not need to intervene. The system did the work by itself. Every lawsuit, every freeze, every lost contract was a gear fulfilling its natural function, and they were trapped inside it. She began to disappear from social media. Posts became fewer. Smiles became rare. Photos grew more closed, darker, more restrained. The narrative of victory no longer convinced even herself. The new man avoided cameras, avoided interviews, avoided public gatherings. Shame began to take the place of arrogance. And when shame arrives, the end is already very near. And it was exactly in this scenario of ruin, debt, closed doors, and social silence that she began to look back again. For the first time since the separation, the past no longer seemed small. For the first time, the man she had despised began to appear in her memory as the only reference of stability she had ever had, and that thought, still timid, would be the first step toward the desperate attempt that would come next. She reappeared in my life in a very different way from how she had left it. There were no announcements, no photos, no proud glances. There was only a short, direct, fragile message asking to talk. I read those words several times before replying. It was strange to see humility where there had once been nothing but arrogance. Her name on my phone screen brought back memories I thought I already had under control. There was no anger in me anymore, only a heavy calm. Even so, I agreed to listen, because some conversations are not meant to rebuild bonds. They are meant to close them. When I saw her again, I hardly recognized the woman who had once walked out of my mansion like a winner. The glow was gone. Her clothes were still elegant, but they no longer displayed exaggerated luxury. Her eyes were tired, weighted by sleepless nights and too many worries. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. Every word carried a weight she had never borne before. For the first time, she seemed smaller than the woman I had known, and that brought me no sense of victory at all. She tried to explain everything as if it had been a wrong turn. She spoke of illusions, of empty promises, of fleeting enchantments. She said she had been blinded by ostentation, by fame, by social status. She said she believed she had found something greater than what she had with me. She said she now understood the value of stability. She said she regretted it every day. Each sentence came with a pleading look, a look I had never received from her before, a look that now arrived far too late. She spoke about the ruin of the new man as if it were an unexpected tragedy. She told me about frozen accounts, about debts, about lawsuits and abandonment. She said he had disappeared during the crisis. She said friends had vanished. She said the world she chose dissolved when the money dried up. She said she had never felt so alone. I only listened in silence, without interrupting, without comforting, without judging out loud. Every word she spoke was a piece of a puzzle I already knew completely. At a certain moment, she cried. Not a beautiful, cinematic cry. A disordered, heavy cry of someone who had lost the ground beneath her feet. She said she missed the security I had provided. She said she missed the routine, the respect, the protection. She said she missed me. That last sentence was almost a whisper. And it was then that I realized she did not miss the man. She missed the structure. She missed the empire. She missed what I represented in her world. She asked to come back, not as someone who loves, but as someone who needs to survive. She spoke of starting over, of maturity, of a new story. She promised to change, promised to learn, promised to rebuild. She spoke of recovering what had been lost. She spoke of rebuilding trust. She spoke of trying once more. But none of those words crossed the barrier that now existed inside me. Time had silently done what no argument ever could. I looked at her calmly and said only a few words. I said that I truly wished her well. I said that I hoped she would rebuild her life. I said that her regret was legitimate, but I also said that some choices do not allow a return. I said that love does not survive when it becomes a bargaining chip. I said that I had moved on. I said that the door she closed by her own will does not reopen out of necessity. She insisted. She spoke of her mistakes. She spoke of her guilt. She spoke of everything she would do differently. She spoke of how much she had learned through pain. She spoke of how much she had lost. She spoke of the fear of not being able to rise again on her own. I listened to everything in absolute silence, because sometimes silence is the most honest answer a person can receive. And in that moment, it said exactly what needed to be said. When I finally stood up, she understood. There were no shouts, no insults, no explicit humiliation. There was only the late understanding that some losses are permanent. I opened the door. She still tried to say my name. I did not turn around. Some chapters do not deserve to be reread. They deserve only the period they never had. As she left, I remained standing, looking out at the city through the window. The same city I had helped to build financially over the years. The same city that had been the stage of her fall. My empire was still standing. Stronger, quieter, more protected. And I knew, with a clarity I had never felt before, that the greatest wealth I had regained was not financial. It was my own dignity. In the end, I did not win because I became richer. I won because I learned never again to place my dignity in the hands of someone who sees love as an advantage. Money can come and go. Empires can rise and fall. But what truly defines a person is the choice they make when no one is watching. She had everything, chose to trade it for appearances, and discovered too late that luxury without a foundation becomes a prison. I lost a wife, but I regained something no amount of money can buy: peace, clarity, and self-respect. Maybe this story has touched a wound in you. Maybe you have already been replaced, deceived, used, or discarded when you no longer seemed advantageous. Or maybe you were the one who chose wrong, believing you could escape the consequences. Life always collects its debts, sometimes quickly, sometimes in silence, but it always collects. Now I ask you, would you forgive someone who abandoned you at your peak purely out of self-interest? Would you go back after being replaced as if you were disposable? Do you believe regret erases choices or only reveals the weight of them? Write in the comments what you would do in my place, because I truly want to know your perspective. If this story made you reflect, if it angered you, or if it held you until now. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here you will find real stories of power, betrayal, luxury, downfall, and overcoming that show a hard truth. Not every shine is gold, and not every loss is a defeat.